I'm Linda Kincaid, live in Atlanta, ahead on CNN Newsroom. Just days after signing off on longer-range missiles for Ukraine, another policy shift for the Biden administration, approving the use of anti-personnel mines in the fight against Russia. Plus, Benjamin Netanyahu's latest plan to get hostages out of Gaza, offering a $5 million reward for every captive brought back alive.
3, 2, 1.
And Elon Musk brings his new BFF to the latest SpaceX launch. US President-elect Donald Trump.
Live from Atlanta, this is CNN Newsroom with Linda Kincaid.
We begin with a major escalation in the conflict in Ukraine, one which Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov calls a new phase of war by the West. Moscow says Ukraine has fired US-supplied longer-range missiles into Russia just days after getting permission from the Biden administration. US officials say Kiev used the ATACMS to strike a weapons arsenal in the Bryansk region. Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky would not confirm the attack, but said now that his military has longer-range capabilities, it will use them. In an apparent response, Vladimir Putin updated Russia's nuclear doctrine. The Kremlin says Russia now has the right to use nuclear weapons in response to conventional attacks. More now from CNN senior international correspondent PLEITGEN in Moscow.
Ukraine not wasting any time, striking deep into Russian territory using U.S.-supplied ATACMS surface-to-surface missiles only days after getting the go-ahead from the Biden administration, the U.S. confirms. Ukraine's president coy when asked about the strikes. "We now have ATACMS and we will use them," he said. Moscow up in arms, claiming Ukraine targeted military installations in southwestern Russia overnight. The foreign minister ripping into the Biden administration. The fact that ATACMS were used repeatedly tonight in the Bryansk region is of course a signal that they want escalation, and it's impossible to use these high-tech missiles without the Americans. And Putin has spoken about this many times. And now Putin has reacted. Breaking news on Kremlin-controlled TV after the Russian president signed an order changing the country's nuclear doctrine. The use of Western missiles for strikes into the strategic depths of Russia means direct involvement of NATO in the war, the host says, and now Moscow's hands are untied. Among the changes, the Russians now consider attacks by non-nuclear nations, like Ukraine, with the help of nuclear nations like the U.S. worthy of a nuclear response, at least on paper.
The spokesman for the Kremlin says the reason why the Russians decided to update their nuclear doctrine is so potential adversaries of Russia know that retaliation will be inevitable if Russia is attacked.
Американский телеканал CNN. Можно?
Можно.
Хорошо. Сегодня утром ваш президент Владимир Путин подписал обновление ядерной доктрины России. Что думаете об этом?
Ну так как, а что тут думать? Тогда какая может быть ответная реакция? Только такая.
Он намного расширит возможности использования ядерного оружия. Вы думаете, это хорошая идея?
Что надо нашему президенту? Что-то надо думать, надо напугать кого-то.
Do you think that the threat of the use of nuclear weapons has increased now?
I don't think they will do it. It sounds like mad people. No, they are not mad people. They are very clever, not mad.
Russia's move to change its nuclear posture comes exactly on the 1,000th day of the war in Ukraine, as the U.S. is trying to help keep the badly outgunned Ukrainians in the fight, now allowing Kiev to fully unleash some of the most powerful weapons they've been given. Fred Pleitgen, CNN, Moscow.
Well, the Biden administration is making another major policy change on Ukraine. According to two officials, the U.S. will send anti-personnel mines to Ukraine for the first time. The U.S. intends for Kyiv to deploy them in the eastern part of the country, where Russian troops have made slow but steady progress. The administration expects Ukraine to use the mines to bolster defensive lines, not in an offensive capacity. I want to welcome Alexander Hara, is the CEO of the Center for Defense Strategies and a former advisor to Ukraine's defense minister. He joins us now from Kyiv. Thanks so much for your time.
Thank you for having me.
So 1,000 days of Russia's war in Ukraine, and there is no sign of a peace deal. As President Zelensky said, Putin wants war. How would you describe this phase of the war?
Well, first of all, we are waiting for new administration to come, and we are not sure about the future policy with regard to Ukraine. Certainly, we have some fears that Mr. Trump would use these leverage that the United States has over Ukraine to enforce so-called peace on Ukraine. So we are worrying about it. At the same time, we lost too much time, and with this permission to hit Russian territory, Russian targets within Russian territory, there's a sign of relief in Kiev, and we are just wondering why it has not happened 2 years ago, and the situation could have been much better than now. But anyway, Ukrainians are going to fight on because it's a genocidal war of Russia with the aim to eliminate Ukrainian statehood, Ukrainian nation. The Russians has been committing genocide around Kiev, and they wiped out Mariupol in the far east of Ukraine, and they are just deporting Ukrainian children and trying to convert them into Russians. So we have no illusions that this war should be fought and Ukraine should win this war.
I want to ask you more about what this war could look like under a new president. But first, I want to ask you about the change in policy from the Biden administration. In just the last few days, we saw the Biden administration give the green light for Ukraine to use US-supplied longer-range weapons to fire into Russia, and they did just that. And we're just hearing now that the US government has approved anti-personnel mines. We know, of course, Ukraine is already in the midst of a landmine crisis since Russia's invasion in 2022. What's your reaction to these new moves by the outgoing administration, and what more could they offer?
Well, they're just trying to catch up because we've seen in 2022 when there is an ability to keep Russians out of our territory, the Biden administration was hesitant. They were afraid of the possible nuclear escalation from the Russian side. Then in 2023, we didn't get all the components that would enable Ukraine to fight maneuverable warfare. First and foremost, the air component, air power. Without air power, neither the United States nor their allies in NATO would fight the war. So we lost a lot of lives and a lot of infrastructure, a lot of time. And now the Biden administration is trying to fill the gap and help us to cope with the increasing pressure from Russia. The Russians are not on the urge. They are trying to portray that they are winning. They are pushing people wave after wave on Ukraine. They are losing up to 1,600 people weekly. And they brought some Northern Koreans to the front line. So we need something. We need technological advance over this mass of the Russians, and the Biden administration is trying to help us with that. But certainly, it's not a part of strategy. It's just like the willingness of Mr. Biden to help Ukraine to be in better position with possible new policies from Mr. Trump. The Biden administration is trying to sort out things with almost $6 billion approved by the Congress. And they are now in rush to provide Ukraine with material and other assistance that we need to protect ourselves.
I just want to go back to this, the new administration under President Trump. We know that he's already criticized the substantial financial aid the U.S. has provided to Ukraine to bolster defenses. President Zelensky was asked about what a Trump administration could mean for Ukraine. I just want to play some sound.
What if the U.S. government cuts military funding to Ukraine?
If they will cut, I think we will lose. Of course, anyway, we will stay, we will fight. We have our production, but it's not enough to prevail. And I think it's not enough to survive.
President-elect Trump has said that he would end the war in a day. Do you think that's even possible? And if so, what could it mean for Ukraine?
Well, certainly it's not possible because this war is not about a piece of Ukrainian territory on the east or Crimea. It's about the statehood of Ukraine. It's about new security architecture in Europe. May I recall you the situation of 2021 when there was a first threat of the Russian full-fledged invasion of Ukraine. At that time, Mr. Putin blackmailed the United States and their NATO allies, and he demanded the United States to pack their belongings and get out of the European continent, and for NATO to expel the Central and Eastern European nations. So he wants to control Ukraine, but he wants to have an upper hand over Europe. It's something that Mr. Trump could not provide Putin with. And just a track record of Mr. Trump. He didn't achieve any resolution with the Northern Korean nuclear program and in the Middle East. So this conflict between Russia and Ukraine, between Russia and the West overall, is more complex that we've seen in the Middle East and in the Far East. So I don't think that it's possible to have a just a lasting peace. It's possible to pressure over Ukraine that Ukraine give up on some territories, give up on some bits of our sovereignty. I mean, our willingness to be a member of NATO, which the only way how to protect Ukraine in the future. But it's not going to solve this problem. We will see nuclear proliferation because the Arab states across the globe will see that you can commit genocide, attack another country without any consequences because the West would be hesitant and would not help and would not stop such a genocide. The other nations, the peaceful nations living in such neighborhood, would seek nuclear arms because they understand that even the goodwill of the American people and the policies, they are not capable of protecting them. Not to mention that Europeans would be insecure and they would not be able to join the Americans in the Indo-Pacific, deterring China from taking over Taiwan because they would need to invest more and more in their security. So the prospects of pressuring Ukraine over this conflict, they are just dire for Europe and the rest of the world.
Alexandra Hara, we appreciate your perspective. Thanks so much for joining us.
Thank you for having me.